Well, as the race to be the next Republican presidential nominee heats up, a new winner is emerging. The mainstream media tries to ignore him as his positions are certainly not mainstream. Ron Paul now gaining momentum in the GOP race. Paul has always had his steady base of followers, but he's struggled to surpass a 10% ceiling. A poll released this evening shows Paul is now in second place. He's at 21%, just 1 point behind Newt Gingrich. Mitt Romney has dropped down to third place. So with his rise in the polls, Ron Paul is stepping up his game in Iowa. He's outspending his rivals in advertising in the state. Take a look at this brutal commercial targeting Gingrich.
Was a career politician selling access here in Washington, D.C.
The year that he ran for Congress in 1978, he made a grand total of $10,000. By the time he became the Speaker, he made $675,000. By the time he left Congress, he's brought his net worth up to about $7.5 million.
It's about serial hypocrisy.
And that's quite a different approach than what he took back in 2008.
I'm Ron Paul, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Well, I don't always agree with Ron Paul, but he's honest, and you'll always know where he stands.
Actually, I agree with him most of the time. I really do.
He wants to get out of Iraq pronto. Cut government spending. Protect personal privacy, personal freedom.
Live free or die, New Hampshire.
I'm undeclared, but I'm going to go Republican and vote for Ron Paul.
Oh, I'm going to vote for him.
So he's obviously kicking it up a notch. Now with his recent surge in the polls and aggressive campaign, has the time come for the mainstream to take Paul seriously? Are people finally getting his message, and could he realistically be the next president of the United States? To help me answer all these questions and more is the co-founder of Ron Paul Swag, Trey Stinnett. Welcome, Trey. So Ron Paul, he's always had his loyal base of followers, but he's gaining more supporters this time around. Who is now jumping on the Paul train?
I think it's a ton of people, myself included. In 2008, I personally did not endorse Ron Paul. I was actually a fan of Mike Huckabee and ended up voting for John McCain when it came time for the election. So Ron's base has really broadened quite a bit. I personally have witnessed dozens of people who have converted over from being a mainstream, or as some people call it, neoconservative Republican, to being a more founding father-minded or constitutionally minded conservative.
And what is happening now that we are seeing this transition, like yourself, people that traditionally were more conservative Republicans and are now turning to Ron Paul and a more libertarian ideology?
You know, Ron Paul's pretty amazing in his uniqueness as a candidate running on the GOP bill. The thing is with Ron, it's not so much the man as it is the ideas. He didn't have very much charisma. He's rather old compared to some of his contenders. So when people like myself were looking at Ron in 2008, we saw a fringe candidate. But as time began to pass and we started to see some of the things that he spoke about on the 2008 GOP debate stage with the economic collapse that was looming, especially in the housing market, as well as the dilution of the U.S. dollar by the Federal Reserve, it began to ring true, I think, with more and more people who would consider themselves to be mainstream, like myself, that maybe this guy isn't so crazy as we originally thought. Maybe we just haven't looked into things as deeply as we should.
And as you mentioned, what's fascinating is here we have the oldest candidate garnering much of the youth vote. I want to show this clip. Here's what Ron Paul had to say a while back about this phenomenon.
The question is why would it be? I assume it's because of the similarity in the age of us two candidates that the young people are attracted to us.
So what is it about Ron Paul that draws in young people? And this is the demographic that some say is responsible for helping to get Obama elected into office. And could he be taking Obama's youth vote?
Well, there's definitely a lot of vigor among the young supporters for Ron Paul. Young political activists across the country have been gathering at these Occupy Wall Street protests, as well as the tens of thousands of people, as you mentioned, that showed up for Obama's gatherings. But Ron Paul's able to garner that same support because he isn't a Manchurian candidate. He isn't your average Republican GOP contender who's just trying to serve the establishment as best he can so that he can get his extra 3 percentage points over the next guy. Ron Paul is running on very sound principles. He's running on a philosophy rather than running on a party ticket. Sure, he signed up as a Republican, and I think that although he can garner much of the Republican base, it's going to be the independents and the young people who may not have really decided whether they want to belong to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, but they hear this one guy who's talking about the things that really ring true with them. The fact that there's tons of unemployment, and our friends and our family, they see that. There's tons of kids who they graduate or don't even finish graduating college with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of tuition debt who are going into this job market that just doesn't have a place for us. And I think what we see is both a broken economy as well as many of our friends, myself included, who have witnessed very close friends and family members who have passed away or been killed at the hands of our government by sending them off to war. So you have this one candidate who, he may not be young, he may not be the most charismatic, he may not look like Barack Obama, but he says what we want to hear, and he's giving us what we ask for, which is a candidate who's going to return us to the Constitution, who's going to give my generation a fighting chance to actually see some prosperity in our nation, and maybe, just maybe, see the United States persist throughout the next century.
And you know, Ron Paul has consistently maintained his anti-war message, calling for the U.S. to stop acting as the world's policeman. Do you think that his anti-war message is resonating today with more and more Americans? And if so, why?
Well, I think that it's not that more Americans have come to discover that not that so much that Ron Paul has changed his message. It's just that more Republicans and more Americans in general have come to discover that what Ron's message is right. Whether or not we supported the wars, as I did, I supported both the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan for reasons that I probably collected on Fox News and other media outlets. We've come to discover that Ron's idea of non-interventionism really makes a lot of sense. Plus, the amount of information that is being able to be garnered by the average voter on the internet has grown tremendously through the efforts of many different online independent media places, outlets like your own. It's a different game. I'm not watching television. I'm not watching Fox News to find out that the war in Iraq is being fought because of maybe some nuclear weapons that Saddam Hussein may be hiding under his palace, but rather that it's a blowback situation from our own intervention in the 70s and the 80s in that part of the world. Things that people of my generation don't even know about because it's not taught in schools and it's not on the media. This idea of blowback when it comes to our foreign interventions and our foreign affairs, I think it's novel for most people. So it's not so much that Ron has to change to pick up the votes. It's just that people are waking up. They're beginning to open their eyes. They see that this recession is persisting despite the inflationary moves of the Fed to try and pump money into the economy through stimulus or through open window lending. It's not working. So we're looking for a solution as young people. I think the majority of the country is tired of these wars. We're tired of the wars on countries. We're tired of the wars on ideas, tactics, and drugs, and poverty. It's too much for a central government to try and take on. Although as a Christian and as a social conservative in my own life, I do wish to see certain memes in society progress and certain sects of society not to be as prevalent. But the idea that we can force that through the use of the federal government's power, I think more and more people are beginning to not only realize that it's not a good idea, but that it's actually not possible.
And just want to ask you, lastly, Ron Paul, certainly he sets himself apart from the other candidates, and he has this really deep, loyal following. What is it about Ron Paul? What does he symbolize?
I think to try and put it in the most succinct terms, Ron Paul symbolizes revolution. He's giving us an opportunity without war, without bloodshed, without fighting, to be able to go back to our founding principles, to be able to find something better in this world, better in this country than what we have now, which is a return to this principled idea that the most holy of grails is that of liberty. And if we're not seeking and we're not constantly trying to find liberty as the base philosophy for all the decisions that our government makes, then what are the decisions being made on? The idea that you can make policies without a philosophy I think many people, they may adhere to that, but it comes from their own willful ignorance. They're not looking into it. If you're not choosing based off of philosophy, you're choosing based off of some political weapon.
Trey, thank you so much for weighing in on this. That was co-founder of Ron Paul Swag, Trey Stinnett.